At 72, you begin to understand the true cost of things, not the price printed on the receipt. I can still read those without my glasses, but the invisible cost, the cost of silence, of swallowing words, of pretending you don't notice when your own child starts counting the slices of bread you eat. It was a Tuesday, April 14th, 2025. I remember because the receipt was still in my jacket pocket. $312.47 at Publix. 2 bags of oranges. A pack of ribeye steaks. On sale. Mind you, $14.99 per pound. Almond milk for Claire because she says regular milk inflames her. Wild-caught salmon. Brown eggs. Coffee beans. The decent kind, not the dusty ones David prefers. $300, my son-in-law said, holding the receipt between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. We were standing in the kitchen, their kitchen, though for 3 years I had paid half the mortgage. The granite countertop, $48,000 renovation in 2023. I wrote the check myself. White cabinets. Brass handles Claire chose after watching some design show. The refrigerator hummed softly behind him. A stainless steel Samsung I bought when the old one looked tired. I bought food, I said. You bought luxury, David corrected. Claire stood by the sink, arms crossed, her smartwatch lighting up every few seconds with little green pulses. She didn't look at me. That was new. When she was a child, she couldn't speak without looking straight into my face. Dad, she said finally, exhaling like I'd disappointed her in something grave. We talked about this. We had. Apparently, at 72, eat too much. You're home all day, David added. You snack. The utilities are higher. The water bill was $410 last month. I shower, I replied. Once a day, briefly. I'm old, not amphibious. He didn't smile. Claire picked up the carton of eggs and shook it slightly. Organic? Do you know how much these cost? Yes, I said. I paid for them. With whose money? David asked quietly. Now, that is an interesting question. 3 years earlier, in August 2022, I sold my house on Marlin Drive for bedrooms. A workshop in the back where I kept my tools arranged by size and sentiment. Your mother's rose bushes along the fence. Sold for $640,000. After closing costs and taxes, I walked away with $603,118.22 wired into my account at First Atlantic Bank on August 29th at 9:14 a.m. I remember sitting in my car outside the branch, watching the confirmation email arrive. Claire cried when I told her, Dad, you shouldn't live alone anymore. David nodded solemnly. It's safer with us. Safer. Such a generous word. Their house had cost $780,000. They were struggling with the mortgage, $4,380 a month at 6.2% interest. Claire's interior design business was growing, which meant irregular. David worked in commercial real estate and spoke constantly about cash flow while having none. I can help, I said. $220,000 for the principal reduction, $48,000 for the kitchen renovation, $26,400 for Claire's credit card debt, $18,700 for Ethan's private school tuition balance, $9,300 for a temporary business shortfall. Over 2 years, I transferred $322,480.55 into our joint household account, an account David insisted we open for transparency. The account was in both our names, but I funded it, back in the kitchen. David tapped the receipt again. You can't keep spending like this. I transferred $15,000 into the joint account on March 1st, I said calmly. There is money. There was money, he replied. Claire finally looked at me then, and what I saw wasn't anger. It was calculation. Dad, she said slowly, maybe it's time we talk about arrangements. I live here, I said. You stay here, David corrected. The refrigerator hummed louder, or perhaps my ears did. Claire cleared her throat. We've been generous, but we didn't expect grocery bills like this, or the constant AC, or I keep it at 74. You don't work, David said. You don't contribute proportionally. Proportionally. I felt something small shift inside my chest. Not break, just move. I contributed $322,480.55. I said quietly. Would you like the dates? Silence. Claire's lips pressed then. That was to help the family. I am a family. David placed the receipt on the counter and smoothed it flat. We think it would be healthier if you found a smaller place. Something manageable. There's a senior complex off Route 9. Studios start at $1,900. I looked at my daughter. She did not protest. You're asking me to leave, I said. No, Claire said quickly. We're suggesting. You're asking me to leave, I repeated. The clock above the stove read 6:42 p.m. Outside, sprinklers clicked rhythmically over the lawn I paid to resod last summer. David folded his arms. We need financial boundaries. Over eggs, over salmon, over a $312.47 receipt. I nodded slowly. Of course, I said. I went upstairs to the guest room that used to be Ethan's playroom and closed the door softly behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed and took the receipt out of my pocket. $312.47. At 72, you begin to understand the true cost of things. And that evening, staring at that thin strip of paper, I began to calculate something else entirely. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. The curious thing about being slowly erased from your own life is that it doesn't happen in one loud moment. It happens in teaspoons. A comment here, a glance there, a bill placed on the table a little too deliberately. After the grocery summit, as I privately named it, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. The thermostat was adjusted without discussion. 76 now. Energy efficiency, David said. My favorite armchair in the living room, the brown leather one I bought in 2009 after your mother passed, was moved to the basement because it clashed with a new aesthetic. Even the coffee changed. The rich Colombian beans I preferred were replaced with a bulk, container-labeled breakfast blend. It tasted like regret. I didn't protest. Instead, I began to observe. I have always been good with numbers. 40 years as a regional procurement manager for a shipping company trains you to notice patterns, invoices, timing, discrepancies. The joint account First Atlantic Bank, account ending in 4421, had online access. David insisted on that. Full transparency, he'd said when we opened it on September 12, 2022, at 11:07 a.m. Transparency is a noble word. It suggests light, but sometimes light only works in one direction. On April 16, 2 days after the Egg Inquisition, I logged in from my laptop. An old Dell Inspiron that whirs when it thinks too hard. Balance. $41,882.13. That was odd. On March 1st, I had wired $15,000 from my personal brokerage account. On February 3rd, another $20,000. On January 10th, $12,500. Utilities averaged $1,200. Mortgage $4,380. Insurance $640. Groceries allegedly extravagant. Perhaps $1,500 monthly. The numbers did not justify the depletion. Scrolling down, I saw it. March 18th, Boulder Ridge Investments, LLC, $18,000. March 22nd, DR Consulting, $9,750. April 2nd, cash withdrawal, $6,000. I sat very still. Boulder Ridge was David's side opportunity. A commercial flip project he'd mentioned casually over dinner in February. High yield, he'd said. Low risk. Low risk for whom? I checked further back. December 2024. $25,000 to Boulder Ridge. November, $14,200, labeled business advance. October, $11,600 to DR Consulting again. Total transfers connected to his ventures in 6 months. $84,550. Not once had he mentioned using joint funds. Not once had Claire asked. My contribution, $322,480.55 over 2 years, was dissolving into speculative real estate ventures while I was being lectured about eggs. I leaned back in the chair and let out a breath that felt older than 72. The next evening, I decided to test something. Dinner was grilled chicken, plain, dry. David monitored the seasoning like a customs officer. David, I said mildly, cutting into the meat, how is Boulder Ridge progressing? He paused. Claire looked up. What's that? Just a small project, he said quickly. Nothing major. $18,000 on March 18th didn't look minor, I replied. Silence felt like a dropped plate. Claire's fork stopped midair. What 18,000? David's jaw tightened. Why are you snooping? Snooping? I wiped my mouth with a napkin. It's a joint account. That money is being invested for the family, he snapped. For the family, I repeated. Does the family know? Claire's face had paled slightly. David? It's temporary, he said. I was going to put back. With what? I asked softly. He stood up, abruptly. You don't understand how leverage works. No, I said, but I understand subtraction. Claire pushed her plate away. Dad, you said you wanted to help us build stability. I did, I agreed. Not volatility. David laughed once, short, sharp. You're acting like we stole from you. I looked at him carefully. I'm acting like I noticed. The rest of dinner passed in brutal quiet. Later that night in my small upstairs room, I opened the original account documents. I keep copies of everything. Your mother taught me that. Account type, joint with right of survivorship. Authorized signers. Harold Whitmore, David Langley. Primary funding source. Harold Whitmore. There was a clause, paragraph 7, that interested me. Either party may withdraw funds without consent of the other. I read that line 3 times. Either party. The next morning, Claire knocked on my door. Not sharply, not angrily. Dad, she said, stepping inside. You embarrassed David. I asked a question. You implied he was irresponsible. Was I incorrect? She folded her arms. A gesture she inherited from her mother when cornered. We're trying to grow, she said. You don't understand the pressure. I understand debt, I replied. I also understand gratitude. Her expression hardened. This is exactly why it's hard living together, she said. You make everything transactional. Everything. As if money had not been the very language of our arrangement. As if I hadn't liquidated my home, my workshop, your mother's garden, to finance this house. Claire, I said quietly, if I moved out tomorrow, could you afford this mortgage? She didn't answer. And in that silence, the final arithmetic settled into place. I was not a father in this house. I was liquidity. That afternoon, at 3:18 p.m., I printed the last 12 months of statements. And for the first time since selling Marlin Drive, I began to consider what proportion really meant. The public humiliation came 3 days later. Friday, April 18th.1:0, 5 p.m. I was in the backyard trimming the hedges. The ones I'd paid $6,200 to replant after the first batch died from overwatering. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and fertilizer. I like yard work. It reminds me that some things still respond predictably to care. That's when I heard unfamiliar laughter from inside the house. Not Claire's light, practiced chuckle. Not Ethan's distracted teenage mumble. A stranger's voice. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped inside through the sliding glass door. There she stood, a woman in a beige blazer, tablet in hand. Heels too sharp for our hardwood floors. Blonde hair, efficient smile. Oh, she said, spotting me. I didn't realize. Claire turned abruptly. Dad, I didn't know you were done outside. Done outside, as if I were a lawn service. David stood near the kitchen island, posture straight, voice in salesman mode. This is Melissa from Horizon Residential, he said. She's just giving us a valuation update. Valuation update. I looked at the tablet screen briefly visible between them. A photo of a house. Our house. Estimated market value. $912,000. We're not selling, Claire added quickly. Quickly. Melissa smiled politely. Just exploring options. The market is very favorable right now. I removed my gardening gloves slowly. Options, I repeated. David stepped forward. We're considering refinancing. Possibly leveraging some equity. Leveraging. There it was again. Melissa glanced at me with professional curiosity. And you are? Before I could answer, David spoke. Claire's father. He's been staying with us. Staying. Not co-owner of the equity I funded. Not primary contributor to the principal reduction. Staying. I felt the word land somewhere deep. But I kept my voice even. For how long have I been staying, David? He shifted slightly. About 3 years. Since August 2022, I said, after I contributed $220,000 toward the mortgage principal. Melissa's smile faltered. Claire's cheeks flushed. Dad, this isn't the time. Isn't it? I asked gently. Melissa cleared her throat. Perhaps I should. No, please, I said. Transparency is important. David's jaw tightened. We're discussing financial strategy. This doesn't concern you. I looked at him carefully. Does Boulder Ridge concern me? The silence that followed was not polite. Claire shot him a sharp look. Melissa suddenly found the kitchen backsplash fascinating. David's voice lowered. This is inappropriate. Inappropriate, I said softly, is asking a 72-year-old man to move out over grocery receipts while using his money for speculative investments. Melissa blinked. Claire stepped forward. Dad, stop. I turned to her. Am I incorrect? Her eyes flickered. Not denial. Fear. Melissa spoke cautiously. I wasn't aware of joint financial contributions. That's because, David cut in sharply, this is a private family matter. Yes, I agreed. It is. And then perhaps for the first time in years, I allowed my voice to sharpen. I sold my home on Marlin Drive for $640,000. I invested $322,480.55 into this household. I funded the kitchen you're standing in, the landscaping you admired outside, the tuition payments that kept Ethan in private school. Melissa's tablet slowly lowered. And now, I continued, I'm being encouraged to relocate because I prefer organic eggs. The absurdity hung in the air like smoke. David's composure cracked first. You're twisting this, he snapped. We're planning growth. You're stuck in scarcity. Scarcity. I almost laughed. Claire's voice trembled. Dad, you're embarrassing us. There it was again. Embarrassing. Not hurting. Not betraying. Embarrassing. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. The woman who once cried because I missed her third-grade recital due to a snowstorm. The girl who used to sit on my shoulders at county fairs. Now calculating equity projections while I stood in gardening gloves. Melissa cleared her throat again. Perhaps we can reschedule. David nodded quickly. Yes, let's do that. As she moved toward the door, she paused beside me. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what? I asked. For misunderstandings, she replied. The front door closed. The house felt different. Claire turned on me immediately. What was that? That, I said calmly. Removing my gloves was arithmetic. You made us look unstable. I exposed instability. I corrected. David pointed toward the staircase. This is exactly why cohabitation isn't working. Cohabitation, like roommates after a bad lease. I nodded slowly. You're right, I said. They both paused. Claire blinked. What? You're right. This arrangement isn't working. David seemed momentarily victorious. So you agree you should start looking for... I agree, I interrupted gently, that financial boundaries are necessary. There was something in my tone that made Claire hesitate. What does that mean, she asked. It means, I said evenly, that I will be making adjustments. David scoffed. To your grocery list? I looked at him. No, I said, to my exposure. That night after they went upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen island. The granite surface reflected the under-cabinet lights. Smooth, cold, paid in full by me. At 10:42 p.m., I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Margaret Collins, came the familiar professional voice. It's Harold Whitmore, I said. I need to review a joint account structure. There was a pause. Is something wrong, she asked. I glanced around the quiet kitchen. The house valued at $912,000, leveraged on money that was no longer respected. No, I said calmly. Something is about to be corrected. And for the first time since the receipt incident, I slept very well. Banks have a particular smell. Polished floors, old paper, burnt coffee from a machine no one cleans properly. On Monday, April 21st, 2025, at exactly 9:32 a.m., I walked into First Atlantic Bank wearing my gray blazer, the one I used to wear to quarterly procurement meetings. The receptionist looked up with a smile trained to be warm but not memorable. Good morning, sir. How can we help you today? I have an appointment with Margaret Collins, I said. Margaret had managed my account since 2011. She handled the sale of Marlin Drive. She knew my pension details, my brokerage portfolio, even the awkward year after your mother died when I forgot to rebalance anything. She greeted me with a firm handshake. Harold, she said quietly. You sounded serious on the phone. I am. We sat in her glass-walled office. Outside, a young couple argued in whispers over what looked like mortgage documents. I almost felt nostalgic. Margaret opened her tablet. Joint account ending 4,421? Yes. She scanned the activity log. Her eyebrows tightened slightly as she scrolled. That's a significant outflow toward investment entities. Not mine, I said. She nodded once. Legally, either signer has full withdrawal rights. There are no restrictions. I know. She turned the screen toward me. Current balance. $39,104.67. That's lower than last week, I observed. There was a $2,800 transfer Saturday labeled consulting fee. Of course there was. I folded my hands neatly on the desk. I want to withdraw the remaining balance. Margaret did not react emotionally. That's why I trust her. All of it? All of it. And transfer it? I prepared a trust structure draft, I said, sliding a folder across the desk. The Whitmore Living Trust. Sole trustee, Harold Whitmore. Successor beneficiary, Ethan Whitmore. Contingent upon reaching age 25. Margaret looked at me over her glasses. You're bypassing your daughter. I am protecting my grandson. She reviewed the documents carefully. This is thorough. I had the weekend. She gave the smallest nod. There will likely be consequences. I almost smiled. There already were. At 10:14 a.m., she printed the withdrawal authorization. The number sat there in clean black ink. $39,104.67. But that was only the joint checking balance. I leaned forward slightly. I would also like to transfer $275,000 from my personal brokerage account into the trust. Margaret paused. That leaves you with... Enough, I said. She did the math quickly. Total trust funding. $314,104.67. A neat number. Familiar somehow. Very close to what I had poured into their house. Proceed, I said. There is a moment, when signing a document like that, where your hand either trembles or steadies. Mine steadied. Ink met paper at 10:26 a.m. By 10:41 a.m., the funds were moved. Margaret closed the file. It's done. Done. No shouting. No slammed doors. No dramatic music. Just digits shifting from one column to another. Arithmetic. Before leaving, I made one more request. I'd like to remove my name from the joint account. That requires the other party's acknowledgement. Then freeze it, I said. Effective immediately. She hesitated only briefly. I can restrict further withdrawals pending review. Please do. At 11:03 a.m., account 4421 was flagged. When I stepped back into the sunlight, the air felt strangely clear. I did not rush home. Instead, I drove to a small real estate office 2 towns over, Cedar Grove Properties, a modest building with blue shutters and a sign slightly faded by the sun. Inside, a man in his late 50s looked up from behind a cluttered desk. Looking to buy, he asked. Yes, I said calmly. Cash. That word changes posture. Within an hour, I was reviewing listings. 2-bedroom condo, $284,000. Quiet community. Walking distance to a park. HOA reasonable. No speculative leverage. No granite islands funded by guilt. I'll take it, I said. Inspection, he asked. I was in procurement for 40 years, I replied. I'll inspect it myself. By 2:45 p.m., I had placed a $25,000 earnest money deposit from the newly formed trust. Closing scheduled for May 12th. Simple. Predictable. When I returned home at 4:18 p.m., the house was quiet. Claire's car was gone. David's too. I went upstairs to my small room and began packing. Not angrily, methodically. 3 suitcases. 1 box of documents. Your mother's framed photograph. At 6:07 p.m., my phone rang. David. I let it ring twice before answering. What did you do? He demanded. Straight to the point. Impressive. I made adjustments, I said. The account is frozen. Yes. You emptied it. I withdrew my funds. That was operational capital. It was my capital. I could hear Claire's voice in the background. Panicked. Whispering. You had no right, he snapped. I almost laughed. Paragraph 7. I said calmly. Joint with right of survivorship. Either party may withdraw funds without consent. Silence. Then lower, more dangerous. You're sabotaging us. No, I replied evenly. I'm stabilizing myself. Claire took the phone. Dad, she said, voice trembling. Why would you do this? I closed my suitcase slowly. Because you asked me to understand proportion. And for the first time in 3 years, the numbers were finally balanced. They came home at 7:12 p.m. I know the time because I was downstairs, wrapping your mother's porcelain teacups in newspaper from April 3rd, an article about market optimism in Q2. I found that amusing. The front door opened too hard. Dad, Claire's voice cracked through the hallway before I saw her. David followed, face flushed, phone still in his hand, like evidence. You froze the account, he said, skipping greeting entirely. We had automatic payments scheduled. For what? I asked calmly. For the mortgage. Claire burst out. For insurance. For everything. I folded another cup carefully. The mortgage draft's on the 25th, I said. Today is the 21st. David stared at me. You think this is funny? No, I replied. I think it's predictable. Claire stepped closer. Her eyes were red, whether from anger or fear. I couldn't yet tell. You moved over $300,000, she said. Margaret told us. Of course she did. Banks are discreet but not blind. I transferred $314,104.67 into a trust. I corrected gently. For Ethan, she snapped. You cut me out. I protected him from volatility. David let out a sharp laugh. This is revenge over groceries. I looked at him then fully. No, I said quietly. This is correction over misuse. He ran a hand through his hair. We needed that capital. You needed leverage? I corrected. You had capital. You spent it. Claire's voice trembled. You embarrassed us in front of Melissa. You questioned David's integrity. I questioned arithmetic. David stepped forward, anger finally unmasked. You're going to collapse this house. No, I said evenly. You will if your projections were dependent on my silence. The word silence hung in the room like a third person. Claire's shoulders dropped slightly. How could you do this without talking to me? She asked. I paused. Did you discuss Boulder Ridge with me? She opened her mouth, closed it. David exhaled sharply. This is manipulative. No, I said. Manipulation is moving someone out of their own equity while using their funds to gamble. The word gamble hit harder than I intended. Claire flinched. We weren't gambling, she said weakly. $84, $550 in 6 months, I replied. No return statements. No disclosures. That's not growth. That's speculation. David's voice lowered, dangerous now. You've just made yourself unwelcome here. I almost smiled. That conversation occurred over eggs, I reminded him. Silence again. The house, valued at $912,000, suddenly felt smaller. Claire looked at the suitcases by the stairs. You're leaving, she whispered. Yes. When? May 12th, closing day. Closing? David repeated. I purchased a condominium, I said. Cash. Claire's eyes widened. With what money? I held her gaze steadily. My money. The simplicity of that seemed to unsettle them more than anything. You're abandoning us, she said finally. The word stung not because it was true, but because of how easily it was spoken. I sold my home, I said softly. I invested $322,480.55 here. I reduced your mortgage. I paid your debts. I funded renovations. I covered tuition. I stepped closer, not angry, just precise. I was not a guest. I was equity. Her eyes filled. That's not fair, she whispered. Neither was proportion. David checked his phone again, likely calculating. The mortgage payment won't clear without the joint account, he muttered. You earn $148,000 annually, I said calmly. Claire averages $72,000 in strong quarters. The mortgage is $4,380. Claire stared at me. You looked at our income? I funded it, I replied. David's voice cracked slightly now. Urgency replacing arrogance. We're in the middle of refinancing. If we miss payment, then perhaps, I said gently, equity should not have been treated as disposable. Claire sank into one of the kitchen chairs. The $480 set she'd insisted was timeless. Dad, she said smaller now, we were just trying to build something bigger. At what cost? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. Outside, the sprinklers began their rhythmic clicking again. I always liked that sound. Measured, reliable. David's shoulders sagged slightly. What do you want from us? He asked. The question surprised me. For years, I had been the one asked. Now it was reversed. I want acknowledgement, I said. Not as a burden. Not as liquidity. As your father. Claire covered her mouth. You think I don't see you as my father? I think, I said carefully, that you forgot. Tears slid down her cheeks now, silently. David looked away. You could have talked to us, she whispered. I did, I replied. Over eggs. The room felt heavy with all the words that had been rationed for years. Finally, I picked up the last porcelain cup and placed it into the box. I will always help you in crisis, I said calmly, but I will not subsidize disrespect. David said nothing. Claire stood slowly. Will you still see Ethan, she asked. Every Sunday, I said, if he wishes. She nodded once. I carried the first suitcase toward the door. As I reached it, I turned back. At 72, I said quietly, you learn that sometimes the most expensive thing you can give someone is access. I opened the door, and sometimes the only way to stop feeding greed. The evening air was cool, clean, almost generous, is to close the kitchen. And for the first time in years, I walked out of that house lighter than when I entered it. Closing day was May 12th, 2025, 9:00 a.m. sharp. I arrived early, 8:32 to be exact, because I have never trusted anyone who arrives at the exact minute they promise. The office of Cedar Grove Property smelled faintly of toner and lemon disinfectant. The stack of papers waiting for me was thick, but orderly. I like orderly things. Purchase price, $284,000. Earnest money already paid, $25,000. Balance due at signing, $259,000. HOA monthly, $380. Property tax estimated annually, $4,200. No leverage. No creative financing. No projections built on optimism. Cash. At 9:17 a.m., I signed the final document. The keys were placed in my palm. 2 small silver pieces of certainty. When I walked into the condo for the first time as its owner, the walls were an unambitious shade of beige. The floors were modest oak laminate. The balcony overlooked a row of maple trees just beginning to green for summer. It was quiet, not the tense quiet of a house where words are rationed. Just quiet. I set your mother's photograph on the kitchen counter and opened the windows. The air moved freely. No one adjusted the thermostat. No one audited my groceries. I drove back to Claire's house that afternoon with a rented cargo van and a friend from my old procurement days, Thomas. He didn't ask many questions. Men our age recognize certain silences. Claire met me at the door. Her face looked thinner somehow, or perhaps just unguarded. David was not home. I spoke to the bank, she said, before I stepped inside. I assumed you would. She folded her arms, not defensive this time, just steadying herself. The refinance was denied, she said quietly. They flagged the account freeze. I nodded. We're restructuring, she added quickly. David is liquidating Boulder Ridge. Liquidating. The word felt appropriate. I carried boxes out one by one. Books, tools, the brown leather chair from the basement. They did not argue. On my 4th trip, Claire followed me into the driveway. Dad, she said. I paused. We were wrong. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. About what? I asked. About proportion. She swallowed. I kept telling myself we were building something for the family, but we were building around you, not with you. That was the first honest sentence I had heard in months. I didn't want to see it, she continued, because if I admitted it, I'd have to admit I was using you. The word use hovered between us like something fragile. I don't regret helping you, I said quietly. I regret becoming invisible. Her eyes filled again, but she did not look away this time. I don't want you to disappear from my life, she whispered. I won't, I replied, but I won't finance my own erasure either. David returned midway through the loading. His posture had changed, less inflated, more human. He approached slowly. I miscalculated, he said. Yes, I answered calmly. You did? I thought access meant support, he continued. I see now it meant dependency. That surprised me. Growth is rare. I acknowledge it when I see it. We shook hands, not warmly, but honestly. By 4:40 p.m., the van was loaded. Claire hugged me before I left. Not the polite, scheduled kind of embrace. The kind she used to give me after nightmares. Will you come for dinner Sunday? She asked. Yes, I said, but I'm bringing the eggs. She laughed through tears. And that perhaps was the first balance sound in the house in years. 3 months later, the house on Maple Crest Drive went on the market. Asking price, $899,000. They downsized, paid off the remaining mortgage, cleared the investment losses, moved into a smaller place 20 minutes away. It was not a collapse. It was a correction. Ethan visits me every other weekend now. We sit on the balcony and drink coffee. Good coffee. While he tells me about college plans. The trust document remains sealed in my desk drawer, waiting for his 25th birthday. Sometimes he asks why I moved. I tell him the truth, simplified. Because ownership matters, I say, especially of yourself. At 72, I have discovered something no bank statement can quantify. Money is rarely the real currency in a family. Access to your time, access to your stability, access to your silence. I gave all three freely once. Now they are earned. On quiet evenings when the maple trees sway outside my window, I sit with a plate of salmon, wild caught, properly seasoned. And I think about proportion. I did not destroy my family. I remove distortion. And when I turn off the lights in my small paid-for kitchen, there's no hum of resentment in the walls, only peace. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it is simply this, closing the door to the house you financed, and finally walking into one that is entirely your own.